Hello, my name is Chantal Chitla-Komagata. I'm the coordinator for the Universal Peace Federation in Europe. This is a series of 12 short presentations featuring the principles of peace of UPF, the Universal Peace Federation. They're meant to inspire you to reflect on yourself and human life in general. The slides are bilingual, French and English. Usually, the English part is in reddish brownish color. Further education on specific topics and numerous conferences are available on national and regional websites in different languages and in all regions of the world. For questions, you can use my personal email address. My short presentations are summaries of topics that could each be discussed for many hours. Listening to these 12 presentations, you will have a very shallow understanding of the teachings. However, the overview you'll get are the main elements that enable us to cooperate on the basis of universal principles. The Universal Peace Federation, UPF in English, is an interfaith and international non-governmental organization. It has general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. It was established in 2005 on the basis of organizations founded since 1954 and has offices around the world. It supports the mission of the United Nations and actively collaborates with it and with a multitude of other international and local organizations dedicated to the cause of peace, justice, and common prosperity. It organizes numerous programs at local, national, and international levels, bringing together people from different sectors, beliefs, and ethnicities, including events related to the international days decreed by the UN, like the International Day of Families. Its founders are a couple from Korea, Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan, also known as true parents. After the passing of Reverend Moon, it is his wife, the Mother of Peace, who has been leading the movement and organizing summits on all continents to contribute to one harmonious human family. So what are the goals of the training? First of all, we'll present universal principles that help overcome barriers between human beings. We'll also question old doctrines by considering new viewpoints. And on the foundation of universally shared values, we'll be able to contribute to the establishment of a harmonious, interdependent, and prosperous human family. And finally, it's the basis to apply to receive the Certificate of Ambassadors for Peace and connect to the planetary Ambassadors for Peace network. And this is through answering questions that you'll be able to receive at the end of this program. Human beings, understood as beings of flesh and spirit, have been striving to overcome their ignorance and attain knowledge, mainly in two ways: religion, to seek inner truth, and science, to understand outer truth. Religion and science have brought to light truths that sometimes seemed contradictory. This has created tensions in the world. For example, in the field of education, some schools have preferred the creationist and others the evolutionist views, each insisting on the truthfulness of their position. It is clear that in order to achieve a world of peace, these two paths must harmonize. This is only possible through a new vision based on universal values. Fortunately, the different domains of human sciences are increasingly addressing themes of spirituality that were traditionally reserved to religion. Quantum physics has clearly revealed the link which exists between the material and the immaterial worlds. This is posing a great challenge to the religions that have been solely concentrating on the truth given to human beings centuries ago. Now is the time for science and religion to become complementary means to build the peaceful human family we all dream of. In this series, you will read passages of different religions. Indeed, the founders of UPF have acknowledged the important contribution of the scripture and spiritual practices of the world religions as a way to help human beings in their search for God. And one of the basic teachings of the faith is that we stem from a common origin, although it is understood, called, and represented in different ways. Knowing our source prompts us to consider that all human beings, independently of nationality, social status, skin color, religion or belief, age, physical handicap, all are brothers and sisters or parents and children. Thus, we are all responsible to find together solutions to create a harmonious human family by sharing the resources, supporting one another, cooperating, and behaving respectfully towards nature. There have been many attempts, among others by the UN, in addicting the MDGs first and now the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, to build this world of peace. However, wars have been breaking out again and again. In the field of ecology, we now see a rise of awareness from the youth around the world. The solutions will come from all of us becoming mature enough to take responsibility for one another and for our planet Earth. Here are the questions to this first session. Please take a moment to reflect on them and write down your personal answer. What do you do when your beliefs don't match what others are telling you? If you hear a conflicting scientific and religious explanation, which one do you choose? When you meet people you can't love because they come from a different background and they act strangely, what's your reaction? Session 2. The Universal Principles and the Purpose in Life. By observing the universe as a whole, we can see that each entity exists in pairs in the animal, vegetal, and mineral kingdoms, and also for human beings. Nothing exists individually. It is thanks to the fact that each element finds a partner with which to enter into a relationship that it can exist, develop, and even multiply. Let's look at the three kingdoms and humanity. Each entity has the characteristics of yang, masculinity, positivity, and yin, femininity, negativity, and can only exist when these complementary pairs form mutual relationships. For example, the mineral world is formed through the interaction between negative and positive particles. In the plant world, the relationship between stamens and pistil ensures the reproduction of plants. For example, through insects. Animals perpetuate their species through the instinct that prompts them to mate. It is the sexual relationship between men and women that allows humanity to multiply. The symbol used here indicates the potential for two complementary entities to interact and unite to form a pair, a new entity. To human beings, this new entity is called the couple. Another even more fundamental pair system for existence is that of the inner and outer characteristics that each entity possesses. For example, human beings are composed of mind and body. The body can be said to be the visible expression of the mind and partly reflects the character of a person. In these pairs, we find two partners, a subject which initiates and an object who responds. They interact through a giving and receiving action that generates all the forces that the entity needs in order to exist, develop, and multiply. For example, a human being feels the joy of having climbed a mountain. The more he has overcome difficulties climbing, and the greater the joy he will express through his body. The teacher who asks questions receives more energy as the students are interested in her teaching and respond to her, and in this way develop. For any partners to interact and unite in a lasting way, they need a common basis and also a higher purpose. For animals, it is the survival of the species that is the higher goal rooted in their instinct. Human beings who share a common higher purpose can maintain lasting interaction if they apply the universal principle of living for others. Thanks to this couple can develop, realize their common objective, and feel joy, peace, and happiness in their lives. This principle of living for the sake of others applies to all levels of interactions. For the individual who unites his body and mind, the body becomes the vehicle that allows the spirit to develop. Thus, the spirit gives the body spiritual elements that energize it and keep it healthy. For the couple, if the spouses live for each other, they can build a harmonious family. And in the family, if parents unconditionally invest in their children's development and can constantly seek renewed harmony among all, it will thrive. In the nation, the government acts under the rule of law with its legislative, executive, and judicial organs. If imbued with wisdom and values, it serves the people. If the people are mature, free, and cooperative, they can realize an ideal, peaceful, and prosperous nation for all. Finally, at the global level, if human beings appreciate and take care of their environment, which gives them everything they need, they bequeath to their descendants a richer and more beautiful environment than the one they have inherited. We will examine all these points in more detail in the following presentations. But now, the main question is, what is the purpose of life? When we talk about a higher purpose for a human being, what is it? What is the primary purpose in the life of a man or a woman? Acquire wealth, a social status, power over others, knowledge? Clearly knowing one's purpose in life allows one to follow a consistent path during the relatively short period that everyone spends on planet Earth. An article in Existential Psychology highlights that it is more essential to wonder about one's purpose in life than to seek happiness. This means that if I understand my basic purpose in life, I can walk a straight path and feel the happiness of moving forward consistently in my life. So let's try to find out what it is. During our stage in the womb, we're not aware that one day we will come out of our watery environment to breathe air. However, if during these 9 months or so, the organs and particularly the lungs do not develop, we die at birth. Now, in the same way as in the womb, it takes a process of development for the body to survive on Earth. So, what must we develop in our 3-dimensional material environment? Everyone seeks peace and happiness. Is there a life after? There are people who believe that the end of the physical body means the end of everything. But it is clear that if there is a life after, you absolutely have to understand what it is, or else you risk living your life without having prepared for an afterlife. More and more scientific research, books, films, documentaries question this belief of no life after death. They speak of a soul, of a higher consciousness which survives the body and gains another dimension after the death of the physical body. It even seems that this is a viewpoint widely adopted by scientists who question the limits and certainties of materialistic science. Yet another interaction between science and religion, as we saw in the very beginning. In this case, our life on earth is a preparation for the afterlife. So what are the essential life missions or goals we need to fulfill during our life on earth? What kind of environment are we going to live in? Water? Air? Actually, the spiritual world is a world of love. Everybody on earth wants love, wants to be loved and wants to love. So it does not require lungs, but a developed and mature heart and mind. That makes it possible to breathe love. Then how do we develop this being so we can enjoy the life after? This question boils down to asking, what is the purpose of life? Is it taught in schools? Is it advertised on TV or social media? We have more and more references to ways of living a responsible life on earth, and we find a concise 3-step process in the Old Testament. In Genesis 1:28, it is written that God created human beings in his image and gave them what can be called 3 blessings. And it is written to be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth. We will see in the following presentations the deep meaning of these 3 blessings as to develop one's personality in order to prepare to bear good fruit, to get married, and to form a sustainable family, and also create a pleasant environment for all. So now, the questions to session 2. Knowing that the subject partner initiates and the object partner responds, give examples in which you act as subject or object partner. Are these two interchangeable? Knowing that a common goal allows people to pull on the same rope, what is the higher purpose that you share with your parents, siblings, partner? What is your purpose in life? Please take a few minutes to reflect on these 3 questions and write them down. Session 3. Peace and happiness on the individual level. At the end of the previous presentation, we saw that the purpose of life is to fulfill 3 missions on the individual, family, and environmental levels. We will now discuss the first mission of life on the individual level in many different ways. A mature human being can be represented as one who succeeds in uniting mind and body to achieve higher goals that transcend the individual needs and provide satisfaction to both body and mind. In other words, you're then able to act for a good cause. You feel good about yourself and filled with energy, thinking about your missions and about others. We know that peace and personal happiness depend on the process of development on the path to maturity. So, if the higher objective is the ultimate good, that is to say, to live for the sake of others, one appears as a person of integrity, maturity, living in accordance with universal values. And it is not what we believe that makes us such an individual, but the way we've been able to integrate these higher values and purpose in life and really be able to live as a united individual of mind and body. Let's first look at physical development. It occurs naturally if we get food, drink, light, and air. We go from infant to child, preteen, teenager, and finally adult. The brain is the last organ to mature, and its frontal part is not fully functional until around 23 years old, according to brain scientists. It is the seat of decision-making skills, and during this period it is better to let oneself be guided in making the fundamental decisions. We must, of course, fulfill our physical needs to maintain the life of the body, but these needs are often disproportionate and sometimes uncontrollable. According to this article by Sébastien Bohler, a specialist in neuroscience, a frontal cortex that is well developed by spiritual practices is able to overcome archaic impulses, which come from our physical ancestors. This allows us to feel happiness instead of being enslaved by physical needs that sometimes become bad habits. The human heart develops from the filial heart, which responds to the love of parents and elders with its filial love. Such children automatically find their intrinsic value and can develop their brotherly heart, capable of expressing a horizontal love towards their siblings, friends, until ultimately they'll be able to appreciate all the people as their brothers and sisters. Thus, spiritual growth should take place at the same time as physical development, but the mind does not automatically grow in a materialistic society devoid of true love. In order to reach maturity, an immature human being needs 2 kinds of soul nourishments: the life elements, such as unconditional love from parents and elders, as well as ever deeper and broader truth, according to the age of the person, about how to live our lives, where we come from, who we are, and where we go. In addition, each person will grow according to how much vitality we get from the actions undertaken with the physical body. The highest vitality comes from deliberate and unconditional actions in service to others. Thus, the spiritual development can continue throughout our lives. It doesn't end at 20 or so years old. This spiritual psychology article is about replacing inner junk food we get through the media, portraying violence and corruption, with soul nourishment we get by reading scriptures. Social development begins with the development of the heart. If children are surrounded by true love in their families, they will naturally follow the standards and norms practiced in their family and apply them elsewhere. And on the foundation of understanding the need to study, they will be able to concentrate on the lessons in school and also master the knowledge they receive. Naturally, they will then want to contribute to their community and automatically will feel happy and receive joy from that. The development of one's personality is also a challenge for every human being, as we are all unique and different from one another. It means, for example, to develop intelligence through the study of science, religion, willpower through service to others, and sport, for example, and also emotion through the arts. We need to constantly develop intellect, will, and emotion and find balance between them in order to act towards truth, goodness, and beauty. This is the aspect of a mature human being who has developed his or her personality. There's also the development of conscience, which is important. It is our inner God. It is like a compass that naturally guides us to the higher good. It is sensitive to words of truth or unjust actions as long as it develops and becomes or remains sensitive to the suffering and needs of others. Finally, there's the development of responsibility. The ability to fulfill one's responsibility is a sign of maturity. We develop it through good models, scriptures. Fulfilling our part of responsibility requires all our efforts, although it's very small compared to that of our society, world, and Creator. Responsibility is what allows us to create ourselves and become actors who can contribute to the overall responsibility of establishing a world of peace. Personal development continues throughout life. If we know that we are part of a greater whole, we do not feel alienated, and we understand that by investing our skills and energy for that whole, we naturally receive great benefits. We feel useful and happy. We see ourselves as a piece of the human puzzle, and we develop our ability to live for the sake of others by first serving our family, then encouraging our family to serve the community, our community to support our nation, and finally allow the representatives of our nation to invest for the whole world. People who live like this remain in history as role models who inspire others to do the same. The individual maturity of a person is seen in his balanced, responsible, conscientious, honest, benevolent personality towards all. Acquiring these traits represents the path to peace and happiness on an individual level. Questions to session 3. How do you keep an adequate balance between your physical needs, such as hunger or sleep, and your spiritual aspirations? Between 1 and 99%, how do you rate your personal responsibility versus the overall responsibility? How is your conscience guiding you? On a scale between 1 and 10, from totally immature to completely mature, where do you place yourself? Please reflect on these questions for a few minutes and write them down. Session 4, Peace and Happiness on the couple level. After peace and happiness on the individual level, we move on to the couple and to the family. If the spouses see divinity in their partner, they can form a lasting couple, living for each other and continuing to evolve in their own individuality and as a couple. They thus serve as a model for their children and their descendants. In this picture, we see two elderly people who still love each other and feel happiness. And love makes people look beautiful. We saw in the previous presentation that the development of a filial and fraternal heart is the basis of individual maturity. And it is on this basis that a man and a woman develop their conjugal hearts to express conjugal love to each other, which is the most intimate kind of love and requires the union of two bodies and two souls. In the old days, marriage was understood as the moment when a man and a woman united sexually and thus became spouses. In the movie A Perfect Plan, we see a Maasai wedding ceremony in which the man waits in his hut. The whole community is gathered around the woman. If she chooses to enter the hut, it means that she accepts to be his wife, and therefore it is her entry into the hut that seals the marriage. Sexual love is an essential component of conjugal love. In the animal world, it is hormones and instinct that dictate copulation. For human beings, it is true love, springing from the heart of a man and a woman, which should be the source and motivation for sexual love. Partners who unite in sexual love become one entity in the image of their source, which we call God's love. They thereby experience oneness and mutual happiness. They can also choose to conceive children. Sexual love is the most sacred and intimate act between life partners. According to Sun Myung Moon, the founder of UPF, marriage joins the life of one woman and the life of one man. In time, through children, it joins the lineage of the man and the lineage of the woman. It thus begins a history, a nation, the world, and the kingdom of heaven on earth. Confucianism emphasizes the relation between husband and wife as one of the essential social relations. In Tendikyo, a new Japanese religion founded in the 19th century, husband and wife represent heaven and earth, the origin of the world. Also, Pope Pius XI declared the sanctity of marriage, which is the culmination of divine and human will. In summary, these passages give the following picture. If conjugal love is of divine source, Then the couple can pass on to future generations a pure life and lineage. Then lasting peace and happiness can reign on earth. A true couple becoming true parents is therefore the starting point for a world of peace. Now come to the questions of session 4. How do you define marriage in relation to sexuality? What is the best way to prepare oneself or guide the youth for a lasting marriage? What is the most essential thing you expect from a spouse? Take a few minutes to think about these questions and write your answers. Session 5. Peace and happiness on the family and universal levels. Once a man and a woman have acquired sufficient maturity to face the challenges of marriage and family, they're ready to enter the second life mission, not only as individuals, but as a couple as well. To maintain this couple sustainable, they must share a common higher goal that goes beyond each one's interests without neglecting themselves or their interests. Children will follow their example more than their parents' words, so the ability of parents to serve as good role models will facilitate children's spiritual growth. The family is thus the cornerstone of society and the first school of love. The conclusion of the previous chapter was that a couple that has developed true love is the starting point for a world of peace. However, if a man and a woman have not developed a filial and fraternal heart in their family and community, their marriage risks ending in failure. So we once again highlight here the importance of the first two spheres of heart to ensure ever-growing conjugal and parental love. It should be noted that all kinds of love are shared with everyone apart from conjugal love, which is reserved to spouses, as it includes sexual love, the most intimate and sacred of all. The Talmud emphasizes the importance of learning to honor one's parents as the way to honor God. In the Quran, gratitude to God and to one's parents is related to hope for a moral descent. In Taoism, we read that each family has an impact on the stability of the whole world. The Bhagavad Gita warns against the collapse of the family. An African proverb highlights the duty of children to take care of their parents in return to what they received. So the basis for sustainable peace and happiness in the family is that this family nourishes the hearts and character, and that it's the first school of love. So the parents are actually the first teachers. And the relation to brothers and sisters, and to parents and grandparents, and to uncles and aunts is the place where we learn morals and social norms and right behaviors in the larger world. Parents who include their children in their investment for the well-being of their community give the children a chance to experience happiness in service to others. So altruism is something that we should be learning in the family, which is much easier than having to learn it if we've become self-centered and egocentrical and selfish people. This article from Effective Neuroscience even points out that focusing on others partially extinguishes the brain centers activated by pain. Altruism thus becomes a painkiller, and it is the natural practice of altruism in the family that provides the best environment for children. They acquire this quality naturally. And altruism does not relate only to human beings, but also to the natural world as a whole. It is essential to take care of it according to the 3 life goals described in Genesis. Do you remember? Be fruitful, multiply, and take care of the world. Subdue the earth. So after looking at peace in myself, peace in the couple, and peace in the family, we're now looking at peace on the universal level with our environment, our planet Earth. This requires individual maturity and also scientific knowledge. As soon as human beings put their personal interests before that of the planet, they destroy it and thus endanger all of humanity. A mature human being will love all the things of the creation, will protect the environment, will care for the prosperity of all, and use science and technology to benefit the whole world. As responsible stewards, human beings can contribute to universal peace, peace with all human beings and with nature, and build the ideal world. We have seen that human beings seek beauty, goodness, and truth. They find it all in nature and in a world of mutual prosperity. They do not have to work from morning to night just in order to survive. They can therefore develop their artistic skills that best match their personality and thus feel the joy of creating music, painting, dancing, and an infinity of artistic expressions that they can share for everyone's happiness. Ambassadors for peace, men or women, are on the way to accomplishing these 3 life goals. At the individual level, by living for the sake of others, they become true educators. On the family level, by establishing a true loving family with a parental heart towards all, they become true parents. And finally, on the universal level, by taking care of the environment, they become true owners. So now the questions to session 5. Knowing that the heart develops progressively from child to parent, what are the 4 kinds of love and 4 spheres of heart? How can you become altruistic? What are the 3 fundamental goals of human life at the individual, family, and universal levels that were discussed in these 4 sessions and are embodied by ambassadors for peace? We're now coming to something real. We've talked a lot about the ideal, and now we're going to deal with the reality and conflicts. We have discussed at length the basic purposes in the life of human beings: to grow, establish a family, and take care of the natural world. Investing for a global entity allows us to feel valued and open to receiving support and protection from that global entity. It can be the family or a nation or even the world that is represented by the global entity. And the entity can be myself or my family or my nation. So at all levels, living for the sake of others is the basic principle needed for peace and happiness to reign on earth. However, this ideal of peace and happiness has never been realized so far on earth. Wars have taken place throughout history, and even after World War II, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the hopes for peace were so high, new conflicts arose. The human desire for freedom and independence has given rise to more conflicts around the world between ethnic groups, societies, and in the families, going from dictatorial and paternalistic to mature and free societies appears to be a very painful process for all. These scriptures speak of a being divided between good and evil. So in Hinduism, we read that the spirit is double, the pure and the impure. In Native American religion, we read every person has a good heart and a bad heart. And in Christianity, in Romans 7:15, we read, I don't do what I want, I do what I hate. These are words that St. Paul expressed in his letters to the Romans. So mankind has not been able to develop the original divine nature, unlike the selfish nature, which is obviously a sign of blatant immaturity. The sign of immaturity is being self-centered and having no goal that goes beyond oneself. We feel alienated and we feel like everything is owed to us. We belittle the world and feel miserable in the grip of internal and external conflicts. People who feel that way sometimes end up committing suicide. And it is in everyone's mind that this struggle takes place. Any thought, action, or word can lead us towards evil or good, depending on whether it is centered on the physical body and immediate needs, or on the spirit and the greater good. These conflicts are manifested around us. This phenomenon is also described in psychology, which depicts a dark and light part of the human being. The question of the origin of these conflicts arises. Were the human beings designed that way? Is this contradiction genetically inherent in our DNA? How can we transform this situation? So many questions arise, and there is still no scientific research in that field. There are several mythologies like the Pandora box, or sources like the Bible, which give more or less symbolic accounts of the beginning of evil. The extreme Oriental religions tend to consider a cyclical development of humanity, but don't point out to a fall of man. For lack of scientific source, we will take a closer look at the biblical account. In Genesis, it is mentioned that Adam and Eve were tempted by an angel, symbolized by a snake, to eat the fruit of the only tree that God had forbidden them to eat, called the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which would cause them to die instantly. Eve was seduced by the archangel Lucifer, symbolized by the serpent. Then Adam was seduced by her, and they both ate of this forbidden fruit, thus disobeying the commandment. However, they didn't undergo sudden physical death as a result of their disobedience, but were cast out of the Garden of Eden and were bound to experience a life of suffering away from God's love. They formed a family in which their eldest son, Cain, killed his brother Abel out of jealousy. This story has been taken literally by many believers of the three Abrahamic religions. In the next presentation, we will examine the interpretation of this story according to the divine principle. Now to the questions of session 6. What do you do when you feel alienated or isolated? What is the ratio you would like to achieve between the time and energy you invest for others and for yourself, between 0 to 100 and 100 to 0? Where do you think the human contradiction of wanting to do good and doing evil stems from? Take a few minutes to look at these questions and write your answers. The origin and consequences of conflicts. This is our session 7. So what is the origin of conflicts? In the previous presentations, we talked about the symbolic story depicting the fall of human beings. The 3 passages from the Bible, Judaism, and the Quran we'll be reading now give us some clue of the symbols of the story of Genesis. The first is from Genesis 3:11 to 12. And the eternal God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree I forbade you to eat?" And the man said, "The woman you gave me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate of it." In Abbot the Rabbi Nathan, we read, "What had the cunning snake in mind at that time? He thought, 'I will kill Adam, take his wife for a wife, and be king of the world.'" And in the Quran we read, "O children of Adam, do not let Satan seduce you as he took your parents out of the garden, stripping them of their clothes to reveal their private parts." In these 3 passages, we can find the topics of nakedness, private parts, seduction, adultery, power, and many other things that we can still observe in society nowadays. I will now give you the interpretation of the divine principle as explained by Sun Myung Moon. It will probably create a big surprise for most of you. Please take some time in the next few days to reflect on it. This passage from Jude draws a parallel between the behavior of the angels and that of the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, who were chasing after different flesh. It should be remembered that the men of these cities wanted to have sex with the angels invited in the house of Lot, Abraham's nephew. So from that passage, we understand that the crime of the angels is to have had sex with a different flesh, that of human beings. Now, these 2 passages from Genesis indicate that before the fall, human beings were not ashamed of their nakedness, and afterwards they felt ashamed and hid their lower parts. So we understand that the same crime provoked the fall of angels and human beings. It is illicit sexual. It can therefore be concluded from the different passages we read that our human ancestors committed an illicit sexual act together with the angel. The clues found in the three Abrahamic religions therefore match with the interpretation that the illicit sex created a fallen and corrupt humanity. Jesus' words that the devil is the father of mankind show that this world is under the dominion of evil, different from what would have been realized if the human ancestors had kept the only commandment given to them. So, what then is this commandment? From this perspective, the first human ancestors committed illicit sex. So, what would have been rightful sex? What was the commandment after all? Different from all the other creatures who naturally copulate when their bodies are mature, human beings endowed with a divine spirit need to become not only physically but also spiritually mature, fulfilling their part of responsibility, of abstaining from just following their sexual drive. Once they pass this test, our human ancestors and all human beings, even now, can find their eternal spouse, form a couple, and become one in heart and flesh. So the commandment was to abstain from the sexual act before becoming fruitful. After that, the commandment is not necessary any longer, as a perfectly mature human being is able to follow the conscience absolutely and remain faithful to his or her partner of life. We will examine more passages from different religions on sexual immorality. In Jainism, it is said, it is better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden lustful pleasure. In Buddhism, we can read, the man who goes to the wife of another digs up the very roots of life. In the Quran, we read, do not come near adultery, for it is a shameful deed and evil, opening the road to other evils. And in Christianity, flee from sexual immorality. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. So they all hint at the fact that all the sins stem from an illicit sexual relation when human beings perform the most intimate act with the wrong partner or at the wrong time, away from God's blessing. We understand that the human fall caused the separation between humanity and its origin, not understanding what our essence is and how to live. Human beings have lived as a divided being with numerous internal conflicts. So, a divided human being, divided between what we really desire in our original mind and what we do with our physical bodies. These internal conflicts gave rise to conflicts at the family level, in the couple, and between brothers. The story of Adam and Eve shows this. being separated from their source of love and truth. The first human ancestors, having become ignorant, were not able to bequeath to their descendants what they couldn't inherit from their Creator. So husband and wife, brothers and brothers, brothers and sisters, sisters and sisters have experienced conflict all around the world. Thus, it's a self-centered love that has spread through immature parents to all generations. Human beings have adopted personal instead of universal viewpoints. They have run away from difficult situations rather than to solve them, abused others rather than be of service to them, and multiplied bad tendencies rather than establish good habits. It is therefore not surprising that the conflict at the human level has spread all over the world and even to nature. Is it not therefore obvious that the problem must be solved at the source by each one of us in order to find a sustainable way out of the ecological problems and conflicts or wars? So now to the questions of session 7. What do you think of the interpretation of the fall of man as coming from an illicit sexual relationship with an angel at an immature stage? What is the consequence of the separation between human beings and their source of love? What would be different in society if people waited until they are mature and have found their life partner before having their first sexual relation? Please take a few minutes to reflect on these questions and write your answers, your personal answers to them. Session 8. Restoration of the original ideal. So now we leave this state of the fall and have this desire to go back to the original ideal which we all have in our hearts. In the first sessions, we studied the ideal of peace as beginning with the individual, then the family, and finally with the natural world. Then we examined the reality of the conflicts and their cause, and now we will address the issue of establishing the ideal of peace worldwide. In the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, it is well said that it is in the minds of the people that we must begin to establish peace. It is with this same understanding that Mrs. Hakta Hanmun, the co-founder of UPF, initiated Peace Starts With Me rallies around the world. The second Secretary General of the UN himself hinted at the need of a spiritual rebirth in order to avoid self-destruction. Thus, we understand that religion should play an essential role in reconnecting humanity to its source. Religion's purpose is to enable human beings to elevate themselves spiritually and become respectful, faithful, disciplined, patient, responsible, and loving. Religion hints at two steps in the development of the individual. A vertical one, which consists in being reconciled with God. We find tools like prayers, meditation, reading of scripture to elevate ourselves spiritually and sharpen our conscience. There are also other tools like offerings, abstinence from physical desires, and obedience to develop the ability to act in accordance with one's heart and conscience. The second step is the reconciliation with others, which is indispensable if we are to sustain our relationship with God. These two steps correspond to the summary of Jesus' teaching to love God with all your heart and mind and to love your neighbor as yourself. So, in this passage of Matthew 5:23 to 24, we see that there's no way of offering something to God unless we first are reconciled to the people around us, even if we feel we didn't do anything bad to them. But when we feel that they feel alienated, then let us reconcile with them and do something for them. So restoration is about elevating oneself through work on oneself in order to understand and practice the Word of God and to love one's neighbor. Sometimes it is just the person who is the most difficult to love that confronts us with our own limits. Thus, every conflict we find ourselves involved in becomes an opportunity to develop our skill in loving unconditionally and loving God in an ever deeper way. The original position that we human beings dream of recovering that was lost due to the fall has to be restored by taking the reverse path of the fall. Instead of acting selfishly, we need to be responsible and take actions that can correct our flaws, weaknesses, and bad habits. We can observe that problems that are not resolved in the present fall on future generations and generally get worse. All the conflicts, the past conflicts between different ethnic groups or nations anywhere in the world will not be resolved until each side takes responsibility to undertake actions to reverse what happened in the past. It's no longer a matter of waiting for the others to start, because we know peace starts in and with me. Now let's look at the archetypes of conflict, because they provide an understanding of behaviors that have been passed down from generation to generation and that are observed around the world and also within oneself. Going back to the story of Genesis and the murder of Abel by Cain, we discover a phenomenon that has been repeating itself again and again and is still costing so many precious lives in the world today. We will study the archetypes this afternoon, but what we need to know is what God said to Cain in Genesis 4. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. But you must master it. So obviously, Cain was not conditioned to kill Abel. He could have mastered his anger and his jealousy. But he did not. So questions of session 8. Where does peace begin? What do you think of religion as a means for restoring oneself to a person of integrity? What steps are necessary in order to restore oneself to the original position, lost by the fall. Take a few minutes to reflect on these questions and write your personal answers. Overcoming archetypes of conflict is the topic of our session number 9. In the previous session, we saw that history repeats itself until resentments have been melted away and wounds healed. This can only take place through restoration. And the Cain and Abel archetypes clearly show extreme behaviors and attitudes that we all share at times. So we talk here about immature Abel and immature Cain, the ones whose story is told in the Bible. So from the story we understand that Abel loved God, but was not able to win the heart of his brother, who was consumed with resentment. And also, he had God's blessing, but did not share it with his brother. On the other side, immature Cain was consumed with resentment over perceived injustice, not seeing his brother from God's point of view. And moreover, he was unable to control his anger, so he killed his brother. By becoming aware of these features in ourselves and not only in others, we can decide to act differently. So we can act like mature Abel and mature Cain, rather than reacting automatically as Cain and Abel in their immature state did. And that takes self-control and continuous practice. How should they have behaved? Mature Abel is humble. And even though he's blessed by God, he remains humble. And he forgives and is tolerant in the face of abuse. So even if he feels someone's jealousy and someone's anger and hatred, he forgives that person and he goes to the person and serves that person to melt his resentment. And if he cannot do it himself, then he asks for someone to mediate, to help him. And that really requires maturity and humility. So many times, Abel, who is blessed and has everything, feels superior, so he will not accept mediation from a third party. What is Cain's situation? Mature Cain overcomes resentment over past rejection. He's able to feel that rejection and what happened in the past was due to immaturity of the people, of those who created resentment in him. And he recognizes the value of the brother who is better off, who has more blessings, who is greater than himself. And he even rejoices over the brother's success. And as he rejoices over that, he goes to him and receives from him the understanding of what he can change in order to also be successful and to receive blessings. So he overcomes hatred and is ready to reconcile. Readiness to reconcile is really something that requires having overcome resentment, having overcome the feeling of being a victim of the other person's behavior. So we see that the key to peace is something that everyone has heard many, many times, but is difficult to implement. To forgive even those who have caused us great harm and whose victims we feel to be. This is what turns an enemy into a friend and breaks the cycle of violence and revenge. This is the greatest sign of maturity and of parenthood. We see in Martin Luther King Jr.'s words a key to loving the enemy. He said, "We never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity." Sun Myung Moon was imprisoned unjustly countless times, and in the midst of persecution and accusation, he, for example, met his former enemy Kim Il-sung and followed Jesus' example of forgiving, loving, and embracing, so that an enemy became a friend. Also, Mahatma Gandhi said these great words: "When I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won." Also be applied in the conflict resolution in marriage. It's the same restoration that must take place between men and women. For a long time, they have had well-defined behaviors, statuses, and roles, and also tasks in the household. And thus conflicts happened less frequently. But as we live in the age of independence, or more interdependence and freedom, gender equality, a lot needs to change in the minds and hearts of both men and women. They have to become coaches for each other, and that seems like the most sensible approach. So each need to take responsibility for their contribution to the conflict. That happens again and again as a couple, especially with children, will face in their lives, in their daily lives, confronted with difficulties, economic difficulties or social difficulties, and all kinds of challenges. So they need to consider how they could have dealt with the problem differently. This is really an important part of the reflection that has to take place after a conflict has started. And we need to do that right after the conflict and not after many, many days have passed, because then obviously the probability that many new problems arise is much greater, and that getting back to the original love that a husband and wife felt towards each other might be more difficult. And then the need to take action. They have to address whatever caused the other person to feel hurt and violated in their feelings and in their hearts. Try to understand each other. Also be open to reconcile, sometimes staying in the victim position on either side, feeling that the other one did what is wrong, and waiting for the other to come back is a tendency. So this requires to overcome pride. Sometimes going to the spouse and telling that we're sorry for our attitude will open the path for the spouse to be proud and to accuse. So there has to be a real common trust in each other's being ready to take the right action and overcome pride, and to seek to correct past injustices is a priority. Reconciling and renewing one's relationship between two spouses is really an important step at any time of marriage. And this requires giving up the urge to retaliate and forgiving and accepting forgiveness. And finally, resolving to change oneself, realizing that this is the only way to open the path for the other to change, is really the understanding and resolution of the mature able, whether the man or the woman. Because that person can adjust to the needs of the other one who still has an immature part in that particular time of their married life. And so that person can create a new environment in which the partner will be able to feel loved and thus evolve and also become more and more mature. There are numerous writings or books, literature, advice on marriage and how to overcome conflicts and challenges. But even so, the number of divorces still doesn't seem to diminish. So it is not knowledge only of all these things that help us go forward, but the practice and the daily overcoming of all these problems that help us solve the past and create a new future of love between spouses and in the family. So now to questions of session 9. What are the characteristics of the Abel and Cain archetypes? That means the immature Abel and Cain. How can one get rid of an enemy? At a time when men and women are understood as equal, what should they do to establish a harmonious couple? Please reflect on these questions and write your personal answers to them. Session 10, the benefits of the marriage blessing. We have seen that an important step in life is marriage. An intercultural marriage blessing contributes to peace, especially when it takes place in the presence of tens or even thousands of other couples. It can amplify the mutual support for a sustainable marriage and multiply the building of bridges between nations, cultures, religions, and ethnic groups. The blessing for world peace is a ceremony for all people. It's a rededication of marriage for already married and faithful couples, but it's also a marriage celebration for newlyweds. It deliberately transcends cultural and religious barriers. And a blessing ceremony can be officiated according to needs, anytime, at any place. It all started with the blessing of 36 couples in 1961, following the blessing of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Ja-han in 1960. And it has developed to become an interreligious event after the founding of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. And here we see this full Olympic stadium that had the participation of 30,000 couples in 1992. It expanded to be the blessing of ambassadors for peace of the Universal Peace Federation. And here you can see people from different ethnic groups wearing their traditional clothes and getting blessed together in the UN building in New York. The ceremonies have been supported by the prayers of representatives of different faiths. It means these great, courageous religious leaders accepted to stand next to one another, accepting that every religion has value and declaring that the blessing of all these couples comes from the source of all religions, from God, the same God. Some have received persecution from the followers of their own faith. Remember that Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi were killed by their own people, unable to have such open heart and minds as their leaders. The blessing for world peace starts with the holy wine ceremony, signifying a renewal, connecting to the original love, life, and lineage. Then it goes on with this blessing ceremony symbolizing that we're one human family united with our common origin beyond any kind of barriers. And then the couples give their vows, and elements of the vows are to share the common ideal of creation, to be faithful to each other, to inherit the tradition of true parents, and to build a family that invests itself in achieving a world of peace. And then there is a ceremony to remove resentment, and that is to acknowledge and overcome historical, ancestral, and personal misconduct between men and women. After that, the couples go through a period of purification and renewal, and that is done through 40 days of sexual abstinence for a new beginning. And that new beginning is a 3-day intimate ceremony to completely change substantially and make a new start in the conjugal life. So now, questions of session 10. How do you feel about a marriage blessing concelebrated with other couples? What might be the consequences for religious leaders of different faiths who pray together for intercultural couples? What do you think of renewing marriage vows for already married couples? Session 11. The Universal Principles and Declaration of the Ambassadors for Peace. World peace, with the establishment of one interdependent and prosperous human family, is the ultimate goal of the Universal Peace Federation. Its co-founders, Sun Myung Moon and his wife Hak Ja-han, have dedicated their lives to achieve this goal. UPF considers 5 preconditions for establishing a world of peace. These 5 preconditions can be understood as universal principles. They are the principles underlying the Ambassadors for Peace initiative. First, humanity is a large family linked together by its common origin that we can call the Heavenly Parent. Thus, we can consider all human beings to be our brothers or sisters, our parents or children. Creating a love relationship with our Creator automatically leads to a harmonious human family capable of overcoming differences of origin, beliefs, nationality, and gender. Second, the nature of human beings is above all spiritual and moral. We can identify 2 types of basic human desires that we seek to achieve: our physical needs and appetites linked to material values. We're looking for food, drink, clothing, and a place to live. We also seek to satisfy our spiritual needs and aspirations linked to spiritual values. We long for truth, beauty, goodness, and love. True happiness can only be experienced when both our physical and spiritual needs are met. Focusing primarily on material needs, hoping to find deep and lasting satisfaction, results in disappointment, annihilation, and emptiness. To find inner satisfaction, people need higher aspirations and a deeper understanding of the meaning and purpose of life. The third universal principle expresses that the family is a fundamental institution. It is the first school of love. The family is the essential unit for building peaceful nations and a world of peace. It transmits values and traditions, but its essential role is the development of the heart through various types of emotional relationships. In a sense, love is like learning a language. Just as language immersion is the most effective method of studying, the constant experience and development of love in the family provides an ideal learning environment. And we know that the first 2 spheres of heart are the basis for lasting marriage and family. The fourth principle is that all beings exist, act, and multiply through giving and receiving relationships, and becoming altruistic is possible by practicing this principle. When an individual serves the whole benefits, as does the individual. The fifth principle is that peace is generated from a cooperation that transcends ethnic, religious, or national barriers with a common purpose: interdependence, mutual prosperity for all human beings based on universally shared values. Today we see a consensus emerging among courageous religious leaders who are determined to focus on what they have in common: their cooperation on the basis of universal values with one another and with leaders from all fields is absolutely necessary to establish world peace. The Ambassadors for Peace share these 5 universal principles which are inherent in the great religions of the world. The network of Ambassadors for Peace counts thousands of people that have dedicated their free time into contributing to a world of peace. The questions of session 11 are: what do you think about defining universal principles? Among the 5 universal principles you just heard in this training session, which ones touch you the most? How do you rate the chances of creating a world of peace through the marriage blessing and the practice of these universal principles? We'll now enter session 12, the last of this summarized training program of Ambassadors for Peace. We will watch the UPF 2020 video made on the 15th anniversary of UPF in September 2020. It will give you an overview of the aims and programs that UPF has been organizing.
UPF had its inaugural assembly on September 12, 2005 at the Lincoln Center in New York City. Reverend Sun Myung Moon delivered the keynote address.
In closing, I ask you to devote your best efforts for the development and the success of the Universal Peace Federation. Thank you. Thank you.
After UPF was founded, there was a series of world tours where the message of UPF was taken literally to every corner of the world.
That it is time for all nations and religions to break down their barriers. Through this, the era of one family under God will arrive and last forever.
UPF is God's cherished hope. The founders spoke repeatedly of an international peace highway connecting the world from Santiago, Chile to London, across the Bering Strait, what has come to be known as the Peace Road, and a vision for a renewed United Nations. UPF emerged on the foundation of decades of programs initiated by its founders and carried out in all parts of the world. Its growth and development over the past 15 years has been dramatic, if not miraculous, owing in large part to the work of tens of thousands of ambassadors for peace, peace activists, and volunteers who draw from all nationalities, religions, ethnicities, cultures, and traditions, bound together by a vision of peace, a vision of humanity as one global family under one God. The range of programs over the years has been both broad and expansive, from character education to strengthening the family, from conflict prevention to conflict resolution, from poverty reduction to environmental stewardship, from interfaith dialogue to youth service initiatives, from support of the United Nations to partnerships with the African Union, and a wide range of international organizations and NGOs. UPF has a global, multinational, multi-faith network of more than 100,000 ambassadors for peace who support and contribute to the mission and works of UPF. UPF's highest award, the Leadership and Good Governance Award, has been given to distinguished leaders the world over. The World Summit Series is UPF's flagship program involving the highest level of leaders from around the globe, including current and former heads of state and government, to address the critical challenges facing humanity.
Very appropriate that we're here on the 100th anniversary of Reverend Moon's birth, because out of the devastation of World War II and the Korean War, he and his bride found the courage to dream that they could achieve something. And it is amazing what they have created together.
Programs have been successfully held in Korea, the USA, Senegal, South Africa, Nepal, Cambodia, and other nations. The most recent structural innovation within UPF has been the creation of a set of associations dedicated to collaboration among leaders from various fields. These pillar associations are: the International Summit Council for Peace was initiated by UPF co-founder Dr. Hak Jahan Moon in 2019 on the occasion of World Summit 2019 in Seoul, Korea. ISCP is an international network of current and former heads of state and government. The International Association of First Ladies, IAFLP, a project of the ISCP, affirms and uplifts the unique role of First Ladies in contributing to peace and development. IAFLP brings together current and former First Ladies from throughout the world, drawing upon their experience and wisdom as women leaders and as role models who serve their countries in significant ways. The International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, IAPP, is a worldwide association of parliamentarians which provides a forum to bring their experience and wisdom to bear in the search for solutions to our world's problems. UPF maintains that any successful strategy for peace must take into account the spiritual dimension of our human identity, experience, and interactions. Based on this worldview, UPF initiated the Interreligious Association for Peace and Development, IAPD. The International Media Association for Peace, IMAP, represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media. IMAP recognizes the vital role that journalists play in providing objective reporting to foster an informed citizenship. The International Association of Academicians for Peace, IAAP, is a global interdisciplinary academic initiative aimed at contributing toward the realization of a world of lasting peace. IAAP is dedicated to building professional networks for academicians to foster a world of peace. The International Association for Peace and Economic Development, IAED, affirms the role of businesses, business leaders, and investors to make the world a better place. In early 2020, UPF convened a Rally of Hope featuring dignitaries including Pastor Paula White, Cambodia Head of State His Excellency Hun Sen, President Macky Sall of Senegal, former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, former US Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and many others.
I believe that the Universal Peace Federation and its a broad set of partnerships in the realms of politics, religion, academia, media, economy, arts, women and youth serve as a good model. I believe the Universal Peace Federation will become a cornerstone to build lasting peace around the world and a heavenly unified Korea based on interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values.
Celebrating 15 years, UPF will continue to grow through service, dialogue, and collaboration, guided by its spiritual and moral vision of one family under God.
Since September 2020, many other conferences were organized worldwide by UPF. They can be seen on different websites. The international one, upf.org, the regional, European and Middle East one, eume.upf.org, and some other national ones. I hope you enjoyed this series and were able to reflect on the content and got new energy and motivation to be an actor for peace. If you want to receive the Certificate of Ambassador for Peace, please contact me on the switzerland.upf@gmail.com email address with the indication of your motivation for receiving the certificate. Thank you very much for your participation.